I've always liked driving at night. Something about the empty roads, the hum of the engine, and the way the world feels quieter makes me feel more relaxed than anything else. My job has me bouncing between construction sites all across the state, so it's not unusual for me to be heading home at odd hours. I don't mind it. Beats sitting in traffic. A couple of months ago, I was working on a small project in a remote part of Utah. Real out there stuff. Wide open plains, dusty little towns, more cows than people. The kind of place where your phone loses signal about 20 minutes before you even get there. I'd been there for almost 2 weeks, and the job wrapped early, so I figured I'd hit the road and try to get home a day ahead of schedule. My GPS gave me a route that shaved off almost an hour compared to the highway, but it took me through some seriously rural back roads. I filled up at the last gas station I could find, grabbed a couple energy drinks, and started the drive. It was about 10:30 p.m. The road was narrow, cracked in some spots, and didn't have much in the way of signage. But again, I'm used to that. It was peaceful for the first hour or so. No cars, no towns, just stars above and dirt on both sides. At one point, I saw what looked like an old farmhouse way off in the distance. No lights, no movement. Just this silhouette of a structure sitting by itself in the middle of nothing. I remember thinking how strange it must be to live out there. What do you even do if something goes wrong? Who do you call? Not long after that, I passed a weird little marker on the side of the road. Just a metal pole with some faded red cloth tied around the top. It caught my eye because it didn't look like any kind of road sign I'd ever seen. No writing, no reflector, just this fluttering scrap of red in the wind. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, I saw another one. Same thing. Red cloth tied to a metal stake, this time on the other side of the road. It gave me a weird feeling in my gut. Not fear exactly, just unease. I started looking for more of them, and sure enough, every few minutes there'd be another one. Always spaced out, always switching sides. I kept telling myself it was probably just some kind of marker for rural surveyors or property lines or something. But it didn't sit right. They looked too deliberate. Eventually, I passed one that had something new. There was a little wooden box nailed to the base of the post, like a birdhouse with no front. Inside it was what looked like a doll, not plastic, like hand-stitched, ragged, dirty, propped up like it was watching the road. That's when I decided I was done with the back roads. I pulled over, double-checked my GPS, and looked for a route to the nearest highway. It said I was still 45 minutes from any real road. I figured I'd just keep driving and get through it. But then I noticed something. My GPS icon had stopped moving. I tapped the screen, zoomed out, refreshed. Nothing. The signal bar was gone. It had frozen with my little arrow hovering in the middle of a green void. I put the phone down and kept driving. I figured if I just stuck to the road, I'd eventually come out the other side. I mean, roads go somewhere, right? Another 10 minutes pass, then 20. The road started to degrade. Potholes, diplomas, even more red markers. And then I saw a sign, not a normal road sign. This one was wooden, hand-painted. It said, "You're almost here." That was it. No arrow, no distance, just those words. I felt cold all of a sudden. Not like air conditioning cold. Like my whole body realized something I hadn't yet. I slowed down to a crawl and kept going. My headlights washed over another sign. This one read, "We're glad you came." I hit the brakes. It was like a bad dream. Like the deeper I went, the more reality started to bend. I turned the wheel to the left, pulling off to the side, heart pounding. I took a few deep breaths and grabbed my phone again. Still frozen. I looked around. Just darkness and desert. Then I noticed something in my mirror. A light. It was small at first, like a spark. Then it grew brighter. It looked like someone holding a lantern or maybe a torch, walking along the road, heading toward me. At first I thought, okay, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's another driver or someone who lives out here. But the light didn't bounce like a flashlight. It moved slow, like fire, steady and deliberate. I didn't wait. I hit the gas and peeled out. The road was rough, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I drove for what felt like forever. Every time I thought I'd see a junction or a sign, it was another damn red marker, another doll, another twisted message. One of them just said, "Stay." That was the last straw. I yanked the wheel and turned off the road entirely. Took a sharp right and started driving over flat dirt, aiming for the hills in the distance. I didn't care if I popped a tire or snapped an axle. I needed to be anywhere but there. Eventually, after bouncing around like hell, I saw lights in the distance. Real lights, yellow-white glow on the horizon. I pushed the truck as hard as I could and finally hit a paved road. Civilization. Signal came back. Music on the radio kicked in like nothing ever happened. I didn't stop driving until I hit a 24-hour gas station about 30 miles out. I went inside, probably looking like I'd just escaped a cult. I asked the clerk if he knew anything about the road I'd just come from, County Road 16. He paused for a second, then said, "That road hasn't been used in years. Washed out after a flood. Locals say it doesn't go anywhere anymore." I didn't say anything, just bought a coffee, sat in my truck, and tried to collect myself. When I got home, I pulled up satellite maps, searched that road. No red markers, no weird farmhouses, no signs. Just a cracked road that disappeared into a dry riverbed. But I know what I saw, and I still don't know who or what was walking toward me with that flame. All I know is I'm never taking the scenic route again. I was 19 when I found the safe. It was buried in the floor of my late grandfather's tool shed under a loose board covered with years of dust and old nails. My grandfather had passed away a few weeks earlier, and I'd flown out to Oklahoma to help my uncle clean out the house. The family farm had been in our name for generations, but ever since my grandfather passed, there was talk of selling it. None of us really had the time or will to keep it running. I didn't know my grandfather well. He was one of those old-school quiet types. Kept to himself, spent most of his time fixing things or sitting alone on the porch with a coffee and cigarette. He and my dad didn't talk much, and whenever I asked about it, my dad would shrug and say, "We weren't like you and me. Things were different back then." The tool shed was the last place I planned to clean. It was more like a barn, wooden, crooked, smelled like rust and motor oil. I was sweeping up debris when I felt the floorboard shift under my weight. At first, I thought I'd broken it, but when I pried it up, I saw something metal underneath. A small square safe, bolted to the concrete foundation. I called my uncle over. He frowned, squatted down, and stared at it like he'd seen a ghost. I asked if he knew the combination. He said no, he hadn't even known it was there. Then he got weirdly quiet and walked off, muttering something about leaving well enough alone. Of course, that only made me more curious. It took me 3 days, a YouTube tutorial, and a borrowed stethoscope to crack it open. Inside was a stack of old black and white photographs, some crumbling notebooks, and a faded manila envelope with my name written on it in smudged pencil. That's when things started feeling wrong. The photos were strange, grainy shots of people I didn't recognize, standing in front of what looked like a cabin deep in the woods. In some, they were smiling. In others, they weren't. In one of the final pictures, the same cabin was burning, flames swallowing it whole, smoke curling into the sky. Then there were the notebooks. They were filled with dates and journal entries, short, sporadic, messy, like my grandfather had been writing in a rush. Most of it didn't make sense. Things like, saw the girl again. She was at the well, same dress, same eyes. They never left, not really. If you hear them whisper, don't answer back. And then one entry dated 5 months before he died. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. You need to burn it. All of it. They remember names. At that point, I opened the envelope. Inside was a Polaroid of me. Not from when I was a kid or anything like that. It was recent, like extremely recent. I was wearing a hoodie I'd bought just a few months ago. It looked like it had been taken from behind a window, the reflection of the glass just barely visible. I was asleep in my college dorm room. I dropped everything and ran back to the house. My uncle was in the living room staring at the TV. I told him what I found, showed him the picture, and I swear, he didn't look surprised, just sad. He sat me down and said, "Your grandfather, he used to talk about this thing. He said our family was marked, something to do with great-grandpa during the war. They were stationed overseas, somewhere in Europe. He came back with something, an object, I think. But it wasn't just a souvenir, it was cursed. He said it followed bloodlines." I asked if he believed any of that. He said he didn't until the day his wife, my aunt, vanished. No trace, no note, no leads. Just gone. That night, I stayed in the guest room. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that picture, how someone had taken it, printed it, and put it in a safe with my name on it. Around 2 a.m., I started hearing footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not outside, inside the house. I got up, crept into the hallway, and saw the faintest movement near the back door. A shadow. But when I turned the lights on, there was nothing. I went back to bed, and I locked the door. The next morning, I decided to burn the contents of the safe. I didn't know if I believed any of it, but something told me I had to. I drove out to the edge of the property, lit a fire in one of the old burn barrels, and tossed it all in. The photos, the notebooks, the Polaroid. But the envelope? The envelope was back in my room later that night. Same handwriting, same faded paper. Only now, there was a new photo inside. It was my uncle sitting on the porch, except the date on the back wasn't today. It was tomorrow. I left before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye. I just packed up and drove until I hit the interstate. I haven't been back since. I don't talk to my uncle anymore either. He sends me a Christmas card each year, but I never respond. For a while, I managed to push the whole thing out of my mind. I moved back to the city, started working, made new friends. I told myself it was just an elaborate prank or some unexplainable coincidence. But then, last week, I came home from work and found something in my mailbox. An envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was my girlfriend, asleep in our apartment. I hadn't told anyone I was seeing her. I hadn't posted any pictures. I don't think I've slept since. I don't know what it wants or what it's waiting for, but I know it hasn't forgotten me. And worst of all, I think I might have passed it on. It was the summer of 2023 when I decided to take a solo road trip. I had been cooped up at home for too long, so I packed up my car, hit the road, and drove for hours, stopping at small towns and picturesque rest stops. My final destination was a remote cabin in the woods I had rented for a night to break up the long journey back home. The cabin was located deep in a forest, far from any main road or city. The description online painted it as the perfect getaway, secluded, quiet, and surrounded by nature. I thought it would be a peaceful retreat after spending days driving and visiting family. I arrived in the early evening after a long day of driving. The sun was starting to dip behind the horizon, and the air had a cool crispness to it. The cabin was just as it was described in the photos, small, rustic, and perched on the edge of a thick forest. The gravel driveway was narrow, winding between tall trees, and the only thing visible from the road was a small wooden sign marking the cabin's entrance. I parked and took a moment to stretch. The silence was almost unsettling, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door with the code I'd received from the host, and stepped inside. The cabin was cozy, wooden floors, a small stone fireplace, and large windows that looked out over the woods. It smelled like fresh pine, and it felt comfortable, though there was a faint feeling of isolation in the air. I unpacked my things, not bothering to set up much, since I was only staying for the night. After a long drive, I felt the familiar pull of exhaustion, so I decided to eat a quick dinner and head to bed early. But just as I settled into the dining nook with a takeout meal, there was a knock at the door. It startled me. I hadn't heard any cars pull up, and the gravel driveway was long enough that I would have noticed anyone approaching. I stood up, confused, and made my way to the door. When I opened it, there was a man standing on the other side. He was middle-aged, maybe in his late 40s, with shaggy hair and a weathered face. He smiled at me and introduced himself as the property caretaker, saying he was just checking in to make sure everything was all right. I thought it was a little odd. Who comes by unannounced like that? But I smiled back and assured him everything was fine. I mentioned that I had just arrived and was about to eat. He nodded and started to turn away, but then he lingered for a second, his smile fading just slightly. "If you need anything, just let me know," he said, his voice almost too calm. "It's a peaceful place, but it's always good to keep an eye on things out here." I nodded, still a little off-put by the sudden appearance, but I didn't think much of it. He waved as he walked away, and I shut the door behind me. I went back to my meal, trying to shake the weird feeling in my stomach. I finished eating quickly, took a shower to wind down, and decided to call it a night. The thought of being alone in that cabin wasn't exactly comforting, but it was only one night. I'd be fine. After I got out of the shower, I climbed into bed, pulled the covers over me, and started scrolling through my phone. I didn't want to fall asleep too quickly, just in case something strange happened. It wasn't long before I started feeling drowsy, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. Then there was another knock at the door. I froze. It was late now, and it had only been about an hour since the caretaker had stopped by. Why would he be back? I hadn't heard a car pull up, and the gravel was quiet. No footsteps outside. It didn't make sense. I stayed still for a moment, listening. The knock came again, louder this time. I got out of bed and crept to the window, peeking through the blinds. There was no one there. My heart started to pound. Maybe I was just overthinking it, but I felt something wasn't right. I cautiously moved toward the door and called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer at first, but then a voice came through the door, low and calm. "It's me again. I just need a minute to talk. Open up." I didn't recognize the voice as the caretaker's anymore. It sounded strained, different somehow. I stood still, my mind racing. "Can you just open the door for a second?" the voice continued. "I won't take long. I just need to ask you something." I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. It was late. I was alone, and I was feeling more and more uncomfortable by the second. Finally, I asked, "What do you want?" There was a long pause. Too long. And then, with an unsettling calm, the voice spoke again, but this time it sounded more insistent. almost urgent. "Please, open the door." I stepped away from the door, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't right. There was no way I was opening that door. I decided to call the host, just to make sure everything was okay. I wasn't sure what I thought I'd hear, but I figured it was worth checking. As I pulled up the number on my phone, I heard a soft scraping noise, like something dragging across the wood of the front porch. I looked through the small window next to the door and saw a shadow move past, just out of sight. It was too quick, too dark. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back and dialed the host's number. It rang and rang, but no one picked up. The shadow outside moved again, this time closer. My pulse was racing. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there. It was the longest minute of my life. Then, as if on cue, I heard the door handle jingle, slowly, quietly. I jumped back, startled. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I wasn't about to wait around to find out. I grabbed my phone again and called 911, my hands shaking. I barely got the words out before I heard the man's voice again, this time from the other side of the window. "You're not safe out here," he said, his voice cold and dark. I could hear footsteps now, his heavy boots scraping on the wood. He was circling the cabin. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. The police arrived not long after. By then, the man had vanished into the night, and I was left shaking, heart still racing in my chest. They searched the property, but didn't find him. They told me it was good that I hadn't opened the door. The man wasn't who he claimed to be. I later learned that the caretaker had been out of town and had no intention of stopping by that evening. I'll never forget that night. I don't know what the man wanted or why he was pretending to be someone else, but I'll tell you this. When you're out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness and trees, sometimes the scariest thing is knowing that you're not as alone as you think. I'll never rent another cabin in the woods again. It started in the fall, just as the days grew shorter and the air colder. It wasn't unusual for things to go missing in Crestwood, a small, quiet suburb on the outskirts of the city. People didn't really pay attention to the occasional lost pet, a car left running overnight, or even the odd disappearance of a teenager every now and then. But this was different. I should know. I was one of them, a worker, just like the girls who went missing. My friends and I were always cautious, aware of the risks, and we had our rules. Never go out of certain areas, always check the car before you get in, never meet with anyone who seemed off. But lately, things had started to feel wrong. It wasn't just the missing girls. It was the way the town reacted, or rather, didn't react. Last year, a girl named Emily vanished. No one knew where she went. She was last seen near the outskirts of town, walking into a well-known part of Crestwood where a lot of the work happens. Her friends reported it to the police almost immediately, but no one seemed to care at first. It took days before anyone noticed she was really gone. When they found her, well, it wasn't pretty. Emily had been shot twice. No motive, no answers, and the case just sat cold in the files, gathering dust. Fast forward to earlier this year. Another girl, Jenna, disappeared. Same story, same neighborhood. But this time it was worse. She was missing for almost a week before her body was found. They found her in a park, stabbed, mutilated, her body left in the open like someone had wanted her to be found. The police treated it like another isolated incident. They didn't connect it to Emily. They didn't connect it to anything. Then, just last month, it happened again. This time, a girl I knew from the scene, Rachel, vanished. We worked in the same area, knew the same people, kept each other safe. But Rachel had started to act strangely, withdrawn, quiet. Maybe she knew something was coming. She was gone for almost 3 days before her body was found just outside Crestwood. No marks, no obvious signs of violence, except for the cold, dead stare in her eyes. The cops claimed it was an overdose, but I wasn't so sure. And then last week, it happened again. Another girl. Her name's Ava. She's young, only 20, with dark brown hair and a few blonde streaks in the front. We all knew her. She was sweet, funny, and always made sure to check in. She went missing without a trace. It's been nearly a week now, and there's been no word. The cops keep telling us that they're investigating, but their response is slow, disorganized. They're not taking this seriously. No one is. It's like they don't care about us. But I do. We all do. The thing is, I'm starting to think there's something more to this than just random disappearances. I've been doing my own digging. There are patterns, things the cops are missing. Every girl was around the same age. All of them had brown hair with little details that made them stand out. Rachel had a scar above her eyebrow. Emily used to wear a bracelet with her grandmother's name on it. Ava had those streaks in her hair, which, now that I think about it, makes her stand out from the others. And the places they were found, always close to where the disappearances happened. It's too much of a coincidence. But what's worse is the feeling. The feeling that someone's watching us. I noticed it a few weeks ago when I was walking home late at night. I'm usually careful, but this time there was someone behind me, following but staying just far enough away so I couldn't see them clearly. I don't know if they were watching me or if I was just being paranoid, but it didn't feel right. I haven't been able to shake that feeling since. I tried to talk to my friend, Maria, who has known Ava longer than anyone. Maria was always the practical one, the level-headed one. But when I brought up the idea of someone targeting us, she didn't look at me the same way. She got nervous, started saying that it was just a few bad things happening in a small town. I could see the fear in her eyes, though. I think she knew too. I could feel it. The thing is, we don't just work in Crestwood. We live here. We stay in the same places. We know the same people. But lately, I've started to notice strangers, people we don't know, lurking around more than usual. They don't belong here. They're not from Crestwood, and they're not the kind of people we usually meet up with. They don't have the look of anyone from the neighborhood. They're older, rougher, with cold eyes that make you feel like prey. I don't know who they are, but I think they're connected. And I don't think this is just a string of random murders anymore. No, there's someone out there picking us off, one by one. I tried calling the police when Ava went missing. We all did. But every time we asked about the other disappearances, they just told us to mind our own business. They said there was no connection, that it was just coincidence. But we know better. I've been keeping track of everything. The last time I saw Ava, she told me she was meeting someone new, a guy she'd been talking to online. He was offering a ride, she said, something about picking her up from her regular spot. She never made it there. I don't know what happened to her, but I can't stop thinking that maybe we're next. We're all in danger. The thing is, the longer this goes on, the less people care. The town doesn't notice. The cops aren't doing anything. And we're just slipping through the cracks. But I won't let it end like this. If you see something, anything strange, report it. If someone's following you, if someone's watching you, don't ignore it. And if you know anything about Ava, anything at all, speak up. Because someone's out there and they're not going to stop until we're all gone. I'll keep you all updated if I hear anything new. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the truth out, even if it's the last thing I do. Stay safe and stay aware, because I don't think it's over yet. It was the summer of my senior year, and my parents decided to take a trip to the mountains for a week. The idea was to get away from the hustle of everyday life and spend some time reconnecting with nature. It was just me, my mom, and my younger sister, who was 12 at the time. We'd never been to this particular cabin, but my mom found it online, and the reviews were glowing. It seemed perfect, remote, peaceful, with plenty of space for us to relax and get away from it all. We drove up for hours, the winding road slowly getting narrower and steeper as we approached our destination. The closer we got, the more isolated everything felt. The kind of place where, if anything went wrong, help could be far away. I remember feeling uneasy as we drove past the last small town, knowing it would be at least an hour before we saw any signs of civilization again. The cabin was tucked away in a dense part of the forest, just off the road. It looked like something out of an old horror movie. 2 stories high with a wraparound porch, dark wood, and big windows that seemed to watch you. The surrounding forest was thick and dark, with trees so close you could hardly see through them. It was beautiful, in an eerie sort of way. But that night, something about it felt wrong. We unloaded our bags and started to get settled in. The cabin was old, but everything seemed clean and well kept. My mom started up the wood stove while I helped my sister set up her room. We were all exhausted from the drive, so we decided to take it easy that first night. After dinner, we sat in front of the fire for a while before heading to bed. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange noise coming from outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind. This area was known for heavy gusts, but then it came again. A thudding sound like something or someone was hitting the cabin. I froze, listening closely. It wasn't a branch hitting the side of the house. This was something more deliberate. Someone was knocking on the walls. I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake my sister, and tiptoed over to the window. The moonlight was faint, casting long shadows across the trees. I squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing there. No sign of movement, no figure standing in the yard. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. The sound had stopped by the time I went back to bed, and I eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day, we spent most of the morning exploring the nearby trails. The forest was so thick that it felt like you were walking through a tunnel of trees. My sister was excited, but I kept noticing how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of small animals rustling in the leaves. It felt almost unnatural, like the forest itself was holding its breath. That evening, after dinner, we all sat outside on the porch, enjoying the fresh air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It felt peaceful, but there was still something unsettling about being so far from everything. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I took my phone out to check the weather, but there was no signal. That was fine, though. We knew there wouldn't be any reception out here. I leaned back in my chair, trying to relax, but my mind kept wandering. I kept glancing into the trees, wondering if I'd see anything moving in the shadows. It felt like someone, or something, was lurking just beyond the edge of the forest, waiting. Around 10 p.m., we decided to head inside. My sister and I sat down in front of the fireplace while my mom made tea in the kitchen. The fire crackled and popped, filling the room with warmth and light. But just as I was starting to relax, I heard something else. A soft tapping sound, barely noticeable at first. It was coming from the window just next to the couch where I was sitting. I got up, my heart racing, and walked over to the window. I looked out into the darkness, but all I saw were the trees. The tapping stopped, and I told myself I was just imagining things. I walked back to the fireplace and sat down again, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. About 30 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a soft tap. It was louder, more deliberate. I stood up, my pulse quickening, and made my way to the front door. I peered out the peephole, but there was no one there. That's when I heard something else, a loud bang from the side of the cabin. I rushed to the window on that side, but again, there was nothing. Just the wind moving the trees. I was starting to feel paranoid. I told myself I was just overthinking things. Maybe it was a branch or some other animal, but every nerve in my body told me something was wrong. I stood there, frozen, listening. Then it came again. Another loud bang, this time from the back of the house. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady. We're at a cabin, and someone's outside. We don't know who it is. The operator told me to stay inside and lock all the doors and windows. They said they'd send someone, but it would take time to get to us, given how far out we were. As I waited, the banging continued, louder now, like someone was hitting the walls of the cabin with a heavy object. Then it stopped. For a few minutes, there was silence. Complete silence. My mom and sister were both awake now, but no one dared to speak. We stayed in the living room, huddled together. The minutes felt like hours. Then, the sound came again. This time, it was a scraping noise, like something was being dragged across the wood, slowly, relentlessly, and it was coming from right outside the window, just inches away from where I was standing. I grabbed my mom's arm, whispering, "We have to get out of here." But before we could make any move, the scraping stopped, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps retreating into the forest. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, listening for any sign that the person was still out there. Finally, the sound of the forest returned. The wind, the rustling of leaves, the occasional animal call, but nothing more from outside. It took almost 45 minutes for the first officer to arrive. He searched the area but found no sign of anyone. No tracks, no evidence of anyone ever being there. Just the noise and the unease we felt. We didn't stay the night after that. We packed up our things, left the cabin, and drove straight back home. No one ever figured out who or what had been outside that night. But the silence of the forest still haunts me. The image of that scraping noise, like someone was trying to tear the cabin apart, is one I can't forget. We never went back, and I don't think I ever will. I grew up in a small town in New Mexico, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents had always been cautious, maybe even overly cautious, they'd say. I remember them constantly warning me, don't trust strangers, especially online. I always thought they were just being overprotective. After all, I was an adult now, 22 and ready to live on my own. I didn't need anyone telling me how to live my life. So when I got the opportunity to move into a small apartment near the university, I jumped at it. I found a decent one-bedroom just a few miles away, tucked into an older neighborhood that still had its charm. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were a faded yellow, and the floors creaked with every step. But the moment I unpacked my things, I felt an overwhelming sense of independence. I settled in quickly, arranging the few pieces of furniture I could afford, an old couch from a yard sale and a tiny dining table. I was excited to make this place truly mine, but it wasn't long before I realized that living alone came with its own set of challenges. One afternoon, I decided to get rid of some old electronics. I'd been holding on to an ancient DVD player for years, something my mom had bought me when I was still in high school. It barely worked anymore, but I figured I could make a little extra cash off it. I listed it on a local online marketplace, just hoping to find someone who would take it off my hands. The messages started flooding in. Most were polite, but offered lowball prices. I wasn't desperate, though, so I ignored them. That was until one message stood out. It was from a guy named Michael. His message was short, but it caught my attention. "I'll take it for $50, no questions asked. I can pick it up tonight." I thought it was a bit strange, especially since the price was higher than I had originally listed. I thought about it for a second. It seemed too easy. No back and forth, no negotiation. Just a quick, "I'll take it." Still, I couldn't ignore the thought of making a fast $50. I texted him back, agreeing to meet. He said he'd arrive at 8 p.m. sharp, and I confirmed my address. When the evening came, I felt a small twinge of unease. My apartment had no security system, and the building was older, with the kind of creaky, untrustworthy locks you'd expect. I had a few neighbors, but we didn't know each other well. I had this weird feeling, something I couldn't quite shake, but I brushed it off. It was just a guy coming to buy an old DVD player. No big deal. I made sure to leave the door unlocked so that it wouldn't be awkward when he showed up. But when 8 p.m. came and went, I didn't hear a thing. I waited until 8:30, then decided to message him and ask if he was still coming. No reply. I waited another 30 minutes and decided it wasn't worth it. Maybe he had changed his mind. But as I was about to go to bed, I heard a knock at the door. It was a firm knock, not too loud, but definitely deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. I walked cautiously to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood on the other side. He wasn't who I had expected. He looked older, with graying hair and a stern face. He was tall too, and he stood too close to the door. I felt a sudden rush of panic, but I opened the door anyway. "Michael?" I asked. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm Michael. Sorry, I'm late. Can I come in?" His tone was polite, almost too polite, and there was a sense of urgency in his voice that unsettled me. My instincts screamed for me to shut the door and lock it, but instead I stepped aside, allowing him in. His presence felt off, like something was hiding behind that smooth exterior. He handed me the cash and I handed him the DVD player, but as he took it, I noticed something strange. There was a small bag hanging from his shoulder, one that looked heavier than it should have been. It bulged oddly, the outline of something unfamiliar shifting inside. "Is that it?" I asked, suddenly feeling a bit cold. "Yeah," he said quickly, his voice a little too sharp now. "That's all. I just didn't want to miss out." I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the moment he said it, something clicked. The tension in the air thickened and a cold shiver ran down my spine. He moved toward the door, but instead of leaving, he lingered. I noticed how his hand brushed against the side of the door frame. His fingers lingered a moment too long. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes locked with mine, and I saw a flicker of something dark behind them. "Yeah," he said, but the word felt hollow, like he was lying. Before I could respond, his body shifted, blocking the door. My heart began to race. I knew something wasn't right. I turned to run, but he was already reaching for the door, pulling it shut with a sharp snap. That's when I heard another voice, low, gruff, coming from behind me. "You shouldn't have let him in," the man said, his tone cold. I spun around, my legs frozen in place. A second man stood in the doorway, just as tall as Michael, but broader, wearing a black jacket that didn't belong in this heat. The door was shut now, and I was trapped. My mind raced. Should I try to call 911? Could I make it to the window? I had no idea. But then Michael spoke again. "We just want to take a look around, see if you have anything worth taking." His words hung in the air, and I could feel the walls closing in. I tried to act like I hadn't heard him. "What do you mean? You already got the DVD player," I said, my voice shaky. The second man, the bigger one, took a step forward, his face inches from mine. "You think this is about a DVD player?" His breath was hot on my face, and I felt like I was suffocating. "You don't know who you're dealing with." They both started moving toward me, and I could feel my panic rising, but something inside me pushed through. I bolted for the door, the handle hot under my fingers as I fumbled with it, desperately trying to get it open. The second man grabbed me by the arm and yanked me back, pulling me away from the door. "Don't make this harder," he warned, but I didn't listen. I fought like I never had before, breaking free long enough to dart toward the kitchen. I didn't care what I grabbed, just something to defend myself. I reached for a knife and held it up in front of me, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop," Michael shouted, his voice full of frustration now. "You don't want to make this worse." I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I had to get out. In the chaos, I heard a sharp knock on the window. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. I froze. Then a voice, someone yelling, "Police!" Everything happened in a blur after that. The two men turned and rushed toward the back of the apartment, but it was too late. Officers flooded into the room, tackling the men to the ground before they could escape. The police took me outside, where I was told that they had been following a string of break-ins in the area. They had been targeting people who seemed to be alone, people who had posted items for sale online. They said it was a tactic they had used before, a way to trap victims by offering too much, too quickly. I thought back to my initial excitement when I posted that ad. The feeling of independence, of being able to handle things on my own. I realized then that I had underestimated just how vulnerable I really was. When the officers left, they handed me a small bag. Inside was my phone, my wallet, and a few of the items they'd taken from the apartment. My hands shook as I looked at the mess they had made, my apartment now empty, save for the lingering fear. That night I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls, realizing how close I had come to something far worse. The next day I locked the door and made sure every window was secured, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. Now, every time my phone buzzes with a message, a part of me tenses up, wondering if it's another Michael, another scam, or something much darker, just waiting for its next opportunity. The scariest part of all is that I never saw it coming. I thought I was safe. I thought I was smart. But sometimes, even the smallest of mistakes can lead to something much more dangerous. Back in 2009, I worked third shift security at a mid-sized pharmaceutical plant in upstate New York. The kind of job where you walk the same circuit every night, badge into the same checkpoints, drink too much coffee from a vending machine, and hope nothing happens. There were 4 of us on rotation. Me, an older guy named Rick, a college kid named Brian, and another man named Russell. Russell was in his late 30s, had been with the company longer than any of us, and mostly kept to himself. He never talked much during shift change meetings and always seemed blank. Not unfriendly, just flat. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just sat there, staring at the table or sipping stale coffee like a machine pretending to be a person. I didn't think too much of it at the time. People are weird, especially on night shifts. Everyone's a little off. One night, it was just me and Russell working. Brian had called out sick, and Rick was on vacation. It was one of those long, cold nights where nothing moved and everything echoed. The plant had multiple buildings, main production, admin, research, and a warehouse. The entire complex was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence with 2 entry gates. Around 2:30 a.m., I was finishing my rounds when I noticed something strange on one of the monitors back in the control room. It was the external camera by the south gate. Just barely in frame, I could see a figure standing motionless near the fence. It wasn't clear, more of a dark outline, but enough to set me on edge. I called Russell on the radio. "Hey, you seeing the feed from camera 6? There was a pause, then static, then his voice, flat as ever. "Yeah, probably just someone trying to get a look inside." He didn't seem concerned, but something about it was off. Whoever it was had been standing there for at least 5 minutes. Just standing. No movement, no reaction to the cold. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I told myself maybe they ran off. Maybe the wind was messing with shadows. Either way, I didn't like it. Around 3:15, I went out to check the perimeter. Standard procedure after a camera anomaly. Russell stayed in the control room to monitor the feed. I started my walk along the fence, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over frost-covered gravel. When I got to the south gate, there were footprints, clear ones, leading right up to the fence and stopping, no signs of turning around or running off. And something else. In the dirt, just beneath the fence line, was a long, thin object. I bent down and realized it was a scalpel, a surgical scalpel. Old, slightly rusted, but definitely not something that belonged outside a pharma plant. I radioed Russell. "Hey man, we've got something weird out here. I just found a scalpel by the south gate. Can you roll back the camera footage maybe 20 minutes? See if we can get a clearer look at whoever was here." Silence, then static, then his voice again. "I'll check." Another few minutes passed. Nothing. I started walking back toward the control room, feeling more uneasy with each step. When I got there, the door was locked from the inside, which was odd, because we never locked it during shift. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again, louder. Nothing. I used my badge to override the lock. The room was dark. Monitor still running, chair slightly spun out from the desk like someone had stood up quickly. But no Russell. His radio was sitting on the desk, still on, still transmitting static. I checked the building, then the others. No sign of him. He was just gone. By 5 a.m., I had no choice but to report him as missing. The police arrived. We reviewed footage. And here's where things got strange. Russell never left the control room, at least not on camera. He walked in around 1 a.m., took his seat, sipped his coffee, and then nothing. The feed went black for about 12 seconds. When it resumed, he was gone. No camera glitch, no sign of tampering. Just 12 seconds of static across every feed in the building, like someone or something cut the signal. They searched the property. No trace of him. Not in the lockers, not in the bathrooms, not even outside the fence. The only thing they found was a torn piece of his uniform shirt near the research wing. No blood, no prints. Just fabric, ripped like it had been snagged on something sharp, something small. Over the next few weeks, investigators started digging into Russell's past. Turns out, he'd been living under a different name for over a decade. His real name was Dennis Mathers. And in 1997, he'd been a suspect in a string of disappearances in rural Pennsylvania. 2 children, a woman, and 1 elderly man, all vanished within a 3-mile radius of a chemical plant where Dennis had also worked security. He was never charged, evidence was thin, but the timing, the proximity, and the eerily similar jobs were enough to raise flags. One photo from that investigation stuck with me. A grainy black and white image taken from a mall surveillance camera. It showed a man, probably Dennis, standing just behind a woman in line at a food court. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there. But his eyes were locked on her like she wasn't real, like she was already gone. After that night, I couldn't keep working there. I left the company a month later. But sometimes I still wonder, what really happened in those 12 seconds of black screen? Did someone come for him? Or did he finally slip back into whatever darkness he was always part of? And every now and then I'll catch something on a night security cam, some shadow, some flicker, and I think of Russell, standing there, watching, waiting. I live just outside of Pinedale, Wyoming, small mountain town, population barely over 2,000. It's one of those places where you're more likely to see elk walking down the road than another person. I rent a small cabin a few miles off the main road, quiet, surrounded by trees, and isolated in a way that's either peaceful or unsettling, depending on the day. It was early November, cold but not quite snowy yet. I'd just gotten home from a supply run in town. Every week or so, I'd make the trip in to stock up on groceries, gas, and odds and ends. The nearest real grocery store is almost 30 minutes away, so I try to make it count when I go. That night was normal. I didn't see anyone I knew, didn't talk to anyone except the cashier. Just got my things and left. It was dark by the time I started heading home, standard for this time of year. I didn't see a single other vehicle on the road the entire way back. My driveway is a long gravel stretch that cuts through some dense trees before opening up to the cabin and the shed out back. I pulled in, parked near the porch, and grabbed the bags from the back seat. It was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that makes the air sharp. As I headed inside, something made me pause. Just a little sound, like gravel shifting under weight. But when I turned around, there was nothing. No wind, no animals, just silent forest. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or deer moving through. Still, I locked the door behind me. The next hour was normal. I unpacked, made dinner, and watched an old movie on the couch. I kept the blinds closed. It's habit out here. The forest is thick, and I don't like seeing movement outside at night. Even if it's just wind in the trees, it gets in your head. I was cleaning up dishes when I heard something outside. It was faint, just a light thump against the side of the house. I froze, dish still in my hand, and listened. Nothing. Then again, thump, a little closer, like something brushing up against the wall. I turned off the water and dried my hands without looking away from the window above the sink. I couldn't see anything through the slats of the closed blinds. My first instinct was animal. Maybe a moose or a bear had wandered close to the cabin. It happens. I walked quietly to the front door and flipped the porch light on. The yellow bulb buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow on the porch and maybe 10 feet beyond. No animals, no tracks in the frost, but something still felt off. I turned the light off and stayed inside the rest of the night. Around midnight, I went to bed, double-checking the locks on the front and back door. I even looked out the upstairs window that overlooks the woods. Pitch black out there. Nothing but the shadows of trees and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I fell asleep. At some point in the night, I woke up to the sound of my motion sensor light clicking on. It's out by the shed, a little ways behind the cabin. I sat up in bed and looked out the back window, but all I could see was the corner of the shed and the dim glow of the light. It usually only turns on if something's moving nearby, like a car, a person, or a large animal. I stood there for a while, waiting to see movement. There wasn't any. But I had this feeling, heavy and tight in my chest, like I was being watched. Eventually, the light shut off. I told myself it was nothing, went back to bed, and tried to sleep. The next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Human footprints. Leading from the back tree line across the yard and straight to the shed. Then from the shed to my back door. I stared at them for a long time. They were pressed deep into the frost, bare boots, no tread. The steps were spaced out slow, deliberate. Someone had walked up to my house in the middle of the night, but what really disturbed me was what wasn't there. No prints leaving, just coming in. I checked the shed first. Nothing inside. I keep it locked, but it's old, and someone could probably force it open without much trouble. Then I checked the cabin, every window, every door, every room. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of a break-in, no missing items. Just that trail of footprints and the gut-deep feeling that someone had been watching me. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to admit how scared I actually was. Maybe I thought they wouldn't take it seriously. There's only 2 officers in town on duty most nights. I told myself it was a one-off, someone passing through, a sick prank. I started carrying my pistol everywhere after that, though. The following night, nothing happened, nor the night after that. I started to feel normal again. Just enough time had passed for that edge of fear to dull. Then 3 days later, I came home from town and something immediately felt wrong. My front door was unlocked. Not wide open, just unlocked. And I always lock it. Always. I stepped inside slowly, pistol in hand. Everything looked the same. Nothing missing, nothing broken. But then I noticed the attic door was cracked open. That attic has a pull-down ladder. I never use it. In fact, I can't even remember the last time I opened it. It's empty up there except for a couple old crates and tools left by the previous tenant. I stared at that door for a long time. Eventually, I worked up the courage to pull it down. The ladder creaked with every step as I climbed up into the narrow space. It was dark, dusty, and smelled like insulation. At first, I didn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted. In the far corner of the attic, behind one of the crates, was a blanket and a water bottle and some wrappers. Someone had been living up there. I backed down that ladder so fast I almost fell. I called the police immediately this time. They came out with flashlights and searched the entire area. No one was there by then. Whoever it was had already gone, but they'd been in my home for who knows how long, sleeping just feet above my head at night. The cops didn't find anything except for the stuff I'd already seen. They couldn't do much. Said I should get cameras and keep the place locked up tight. They did extra patrols in the area for a few days, but there were no updates. I installed cameras all around the house after that. Front, back, attic entrance, everything. For a couple weeks, nothing happened. Then one night, just after 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion alert. Attic camera. I opened the app and stared at the screen, heart pounding. And there he was, a man crawling out of the shadows, slowly making his way toward the camera. His face was pale, blank, like he was completely detached. He just stared into the lens for nearly 10 seconds, and then turned around and disappeared from view. By the time the police arrived, he was long gone again, but the footage was clear enough. They took it seriously this time. Turns out there had been reports of a drifter in the area, someone living in old hunting cabins and sheds, breaking into houses when people weren't home. Only this time the house was occupied. They never caught him. I moved out 2 weeks later, and to this day I can't stop thinking about that night. The footprints led to my back door and never left, because I still don't know if that was the first night he came inside, or just the first night I noticed. It happened in late 2017. I was living in a small town just outside of Manchester at the time, and I had this late shift at a call center. Finished around 11 p.m. most nights. Nothing glamorous, just part-time work to make ends meet while I figured things out. One night, my ride fell through, so I had to take the last train home. The station wasn't busy, just a few scattered people on the platform, most of them with their hoods up or earbuds in. I remember feeling kind of uneasy, but I chalked it up to being tired. That kind of tired where your brain starts playing tricks on you. The train rolled in, and I picked a carriage that looked mostly empty. Just one other person sat in the back corner. Middle-aged guy, average build, looked like he'd had a rough few years. He had a small duffel bag at his feet, and he was just staring out the window. I nodded at him out of habit when I walked past, but he didn't acknowledge me. Just kept staring at the glass, even though we were underground at that point and there was nothing to see. I sat a few rows down from him, back against the wall, earphones in, but no music playing. Something about him made me feel like I should stay alert. Maybe 10 minutes into the ride, the lights in the carriage flickered, just once, but enough to make everyone look up. That's when I noticed the guy had shifted. He was now leaning slightly forward, like he was watching me in the reflection of the window. I wasn't sure at first, thought maybe I was being paranoid, but the longer I pretended to look at my phone, the more I became convinced he was watching me. Not directly, always through the glass, like he didn't want me to know he was paying attention. At the next stop, a few people got off, and no one new got on. I considered switching carriages, but didn't want to make it obvious. Besides, my stop was only 3 more stations away. A few minutes later, I felt someone move closer. I glanced up and saw that the man had left his seat and was now standing a few feet away, holding onto the railing, still staring straight ahead. But the way he gripped that metal pole, knuckles white, body completely still, made something in my stomach turn, like he was holding back some kind of impulse. He finally turned his head and said something. I took one earphone out. "You know what the worst kind of silence is?" he asked. His voice was low, almost like a whisper, but it cut through the humming of the train. I didn't respond at first. I just stared at him, confused. He tilted his head, waiting, then answered his own question. It's the kind that happens just before something bad. Then he walked back to his seat, like he hadn't said anything weird at all. I sat there frozen. Every instinct was telling me to get out of that carriage, to hit the emergency button or move to the next one, but I was stuck. I just kept telling myself, 2 more stops, just 2. When the train pulled into the next station, I stood up slowly and walked toward the doors. I wasn't even sure if I'd switch carriages or just wait for another train, but I needed space. As I passed him, he looked up again and smiled. Not friendly, tight-lipped, like he was holding something back. Then he said, "Good choice." That stopped me. I turned to ask what he meant, but the doors had already closed, and the train started moving again. I stood on that platform, heart hammering, staring at the back of that carriage until it disappeared into the tunnel. I reported it, told one of the staff members on duty about the guy, gave a description, but they just kind of shrugged, said unless he did something, there wasn't much they could do. That would have been the end of it if not for what happened a few days later. I was scrolling through local news on my phone and saw a headline, "Man found deceased on late-night train." It caught my eye because of the photo. Blurry CCTV still, but I recognized the man immediately. Same jacket, same face, same duffel bag at his feet. Only this time he wasn't sitting up. He died right there in his seat, apparently from an overdose. But that's not the part that stuck with me. The article mentioned the police were investigating something else. Passengers on the train had reported that he'd been acting strangely in the days leading up to his death. Talking to people, asking them strange questions, offering items from his bag, some of which turned out to be weapons. Knives, duct tape, even an old hammer. They found a notebook inside the bag, too. Pages filled with erratic writing, drawings, weird ramblings about testing reactions and measuring silence. One sentence kept repeating across multiple pages. "They won't stop me if they don't know what I'm doing." That could have been me. I think about that a lot. He looked right at me and said, "Good choice," when I left that train. Did he mean that literally? Like I passed some kind of test? Or did he just get distracted that night? I'll never know what might have happened if I'd stayed on that train. I tell myself he probably wouldn't have done anything, that maybe he was just disturbed and looking for attention. But deep down, I know something was off. The kind of off that stays with you. Every time I take public transport now, I sit near the door. I keep my headphones off. And I never ignore that gut feeling again, just in case someone else is waiting to measure silence.